My mom is a manipulator. She used my golden brother as bait. And when everyone found out, I said, "Hi, Reddit. I've never done this before, but I feel like I need to get this off my chest. My name's Lisa. I'm 32 years old, and I've been struggling with a lot of buried pain from my childhood. Growing up, my family wasn't like most others. At least, I hope not. I'll start from the beginning. My mom, Amanda, now 58, has always been difficult, to say the least. She's the kind of woman who can turn anything into an argument, twist words like a pretzel, and never, ever admit she's wrong. And somehow, I always ended up being the target. When I was little, everything that went wrong in our house was my fault. Spilled milk? Lisa, you're always so clumsy. Mom's bad mood? If you weren't so difficult, I wouldn't have to yell. Even when I tried to help, it wasn't good enough. I still remember one Thanksgiving when I was about 8. I spent hours helping peel potatoes, and when I accidentally dropped one, Mom exploded. "You can't do anything right," she snapped. It was always like that. On the other hand, my younger brother Zach was a golden boy. He's 5 years younger than me, and from the moment he was born, he could do no wrong in Mom's eyes. If Zach left his toys out, Mom would laugh it off. Boys will be boys. If he got a bad grade, it was the teacher's fault. And if I dared to point out the double standard, well, that just made me jealous and mean. I think the moment I realized just how deeply unfair things were was when I was 12. I'd worked so hard on a science project for school, a volcano that actually erupted with baking soda and vinegar. I was so proud of it. But when I showed it to Mom, she barely looked up from her book. "That's nice," she said, her tone flat. Then Zach toddled into the room, holding a stick figure drawing he'd scribbled in crayon. Mom beamed like he'd just won the Nobel Prize. "Oh my God, Zach, that's amazing. Let's hang it on the fridge." I stood there, holding my volcano, feeling invisible. The older I got, the worse it became. By the time I was a teenager, Mom's criticism turned cutting and personal. She hated the way I dressed, the way I talked, even the way I laughed. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" she'd ask, as if Zach was the blueprint for human perfection. I remember one fight when I was 16. Mom had found out I'd skipped a class to study for a big exam. Ironic, right? She screamed at me for hours, calling me irresponsible and a disappointment. Meanwhile, Zach had been caught shoplifting that same week, and all she said to him was, "Boys make mistakes." It wasn't just Mom, though. The dynamic spilled over into our extended family. Mom would tell everyone at family gatherings how difficult I was, how I was always causing problems. She painted Zach as the hero and me as the villain. My aunt once told me, "You should try to be more like your brother. Your mom has a hard enough time without you acting out." But here's the thing. I wasn't acting out. I was just trying to survive in a household where nothing I did was good enough. There was one particularly bad incident when I was 17. I'd saved up for months to buy myself a dress for prom. It wasn't fancy, just a simple blue gown, but I loved it. The night of the dance, as I was getting ready, Mom barged into my room. "What are you wearing?" she demanded. "It's for prom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She sneered. "You look ridiculous. No wonder you don't have a boyfriend." I don't know what came over me, but I snapped. "Why do you hate me so much?" I yelled. Her response? She slapped me. "Don't be so dramatic," she said, her voice icy. "If you weren't so difficult, maybe people would like you." After that, I stopped trying to please her. When I left for college at 18, I thought I'd finally escape. But the guilt trips started almost immediately. Every phone call with Mom turned into a lecture. "You never call," she'd say, even though I called every week. "Zach calls me every day." Zach, of course, stayed close to home. He never had to lift a finger. Mom paid his bills, did his laundry, even cooked his meals. Meanwhile, I was working 2 part-time jobs to pay for school. The worst part? Zach bought into it. He'd say things like, "Mom's just stressed, Lisa. You should try to be more understanding." Understanding? I wanted to scream. I was drowning, and no one seemed to notice. I thought things would get better as I got older, but here I am at 32. And Mom still finds ways to make me feel like a failure. Last Christmas, she gave me a cookbook as a gift. "Maybe you'll finally learn how to cook something edible," she said with a laugh. Meanwhile, Zach got a new watch. Every time I try to confront her about the way she treats me, she twists it around. "I'm your mother," she says. "I did my best. You're just too sensitive." It's like talking to a wall. The sad thing is, I still catch myself craving her approval. I want her to say she's proud of me, to acknowledge everything I've accomplished on my own. But deep down, I know it's never going to happen. And now, As I sit here writing this, I'm starting to wonder if I'll ever be able to heal. How do you move on from a childhood like that? I guess I'm hoping that by sharing my story, I'll find some clarity. Maybe someone out there has been through something similar and can tell me how they survived it. Hi again, Reddit. If you read my first post, you know how toxic my relationship with my mom, Amanda, has been. You'd think by my age, I'd have learned to detach myself emotionally, but it's not that easy when you've spent your entire life walking on eggshells. The latest blow-up came last month. My brother Zach had been interviewing for this incredibly high-paying job, $200,000 a year. It was a senior-level position he had absolutely no qualifications for, but Mom was convinced he was destined for it. She hyped it up for weeks, calling family members to brag about how Zach's finally getting the recognition he deserves. Here's the kicker. I helped him prepare for it. I wrote his cover letter, revamped his resume, and even coached him on common interview questions. And honestly, he didn't care. Half the time, he'd cancel our practice sessions last minute, saying, "Don't stress so much, Lisa. It's just a job." The interview came and went, and unsurprisingly, Zach didn't get the job. Mom called me the day the rejection letter arrived. Her voice was trembling with rage, and I instantly knew what was coming. "This is your fault," she screamed before I could even say hello. "Excuse me?" I replied, completely blindsided. "You sabotaged him," she continued. "I knew I shouldn't have let you help. You've always been jealous of him." I was so stunned I couldn't even respond at first. "Mom, I spent hours helping him. I finally managed. If anything, I did more work than he did." But she wasn't listening. She never listens. "Don't lie to me, Lisa. You probably told him the wrong things on purpose. You've always been bitter about his success." His success? Zach, the man-child who still lives with her and has never held a full-time job for more than 6 months? I hung up on her that day. For the first time in my life, I didn't bother defending myself. What was the point? She'd already decided I was the villain in this story. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. For years, I'd let her rewrite the narrative, painting me as the problem while Zach got away with everything. I decided it was time to take control of the story. I started collecting evidence of her toxic behavior. I know it sounds dramatic, but I needed something concrete, not just for me, but to show the people in my life who still believed her lies. The first step was recording our phone calls. It didn't take long to get material. The very next time she called, she launched into one of her rants about how ungrateful I was. "I sacrificed everything for you," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "And this is how you repay me? No wonder no one likes you." I didn't say much during that call, just let her talk. When I played it back later, I felt a strange mix of validation and heartbreak. Hearing the venom in her voice, the way she twisted every situation to make me the bad guy, made me realize just how deeply ingrained her behavior was. Next, I started going through old emails and texts. There was a treasure trove of manipulative messages, like the time she guilted me into sending her money for Zach's car repairs, even though I was struggling to pay my own rent. "Lisa, if you really cared about this family, you'd help your brother," she'd written. "It's not like you have kids to support. Stop being so selfish." And then there were the messages she'd sent to other family members about me, things I wasn't supposed to see but had been forwarded to me over the years. "She's always been difficult," one read. "I don't know where I went wrong with her. Zach is such a blessing, but Lisa, she's just a burden." I'd read those words before, but this time I saved them. As I dug deeper, I started to notice patterns I hadn't fully grasped before. Mom wasn't just toxic. She was calculating. She knew exactly how to pit me against Zach, how to isolate me from the rest of the family, and how to make herself the perpetual victim. One night, I decided to confront Zach. We hadn't spoken much since the job interview debacle, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to hear the truth. "Do you realize how much Mom manipulates you?" I asked him. He looked genuinely confused. "What are you talking about?" "She's been pitting us against each other for years," I said. "She treats you like you can do no wrong and blames me for everything. Don't you see how unhealthy that is?" He shrugged. "She's just stressed. You know how she is." I wanted to scream. "No, Zach. This isn't normal. It's not okay." But he refused to engage. "I don't want to get in the middle of this," he said before walking away. That's when it hit me. Zach wasn't just the golden child. He was her accomplice. Whether he realized it or not, he benefited from her toxic behavior and had no incentive to change the dynamic. The final straw came a week later. Mom called me, sobbing hysterically. At first, I thought something terrible had happened, but it quickly became clear this was just another performance. "Your brother's devastated," she wailed. He was counting on that job, and now he's completely lost. You need to fix this, Lisa. Fix what? I asked, my voice flat. You need to call the company and explain that it was your fault he wasn't prepared, she said, as if this was a perfectly reasonable request. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mom, do you even hear yourself? You want me to call a company and take the blame for something I didn't do? You owe him that much, she snapped. That was the moment I realized I was done. Done trying to please her, done taking the blame for things that weren't my fault, and done letting her control my life. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with all the evidence I've collected. Part of me wants to share it with the rest of the family, to finally expose her for who she really is. But another part of me wonders if it's even worth it. Will they believe me, or will they just see me as the difficult one, like Mom always said? For now, I'm focusing on taking back my power. I've started therapy, and my therapist has been helping me unpack years of emotional abuse. It's not an easy process, but for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm moving in the right direction. Hi Reddit. This whole situation with my mom has spiraled in ways I didn't expect. If you've been following my posts, you know that my mom, Amanda, has made my life hell for as long as I can remember. But recently, something happened at a family dinner that changed everything, or at least gave me a glimpse of hope. It started innocently enough, with one of those dreaded family gatherings Mom loves to host. She thrives on being the center of attention, orchestrating every moment, and subtly, or not so subtly, jabbing at me in front of everyone. This particular dinner was for Zach's birthday. He's 27 now and still living with her, but of course, she'd framed the whole thing as a celebration of his many accomplishments. I debated not going, but something in me wanted to face her head-on. The evening started off predictably. Mom hovered around Zach, lavishing praise on him for things like being such a thoughtful son and having such a bright future ahead. Meanwhile, I was relegated to setting the table and fetching drinks, as if I were hired help. Things took a turn when someone brought up Aunt Karen. Why isn't Karen here? My cousin Melanie asked. She's a sharp, no-nonsense type and one of the few family members who doesn't buy into Mom's nonsense. Mom sighed dramatically, the way she does when she's about to spin one of her stories. Oh, you know Karen, she said, shaking her head. She and Lisa had a falling out a few years ago, and she still hasn't forgiven her. I froze. What? I asked, my voice sharp enough to cut through the chatter. Mom looked at me with that smug, knowing expression she's perfected over the years. You know what I'm talking about, Lisa. The argument you had with her at Christmas 4 years ago. She told me all about it. I felt my face flush with anger. There had been no argument. Aunt Karen and I had always gotten along well, better than most people in the family. And the idea that she'd hold a grudge for years over some imaginary conflict was absurd. That's not true, I said, my voice steady. Mom gave a dismissive wave. Of course you'd say that. You never take responsibility for anything. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. Normally, I'd have let it go, unwilling to cause a scene. But not this time. Actually, I said, reaching for my phone, I've been in touch with Aunt Karen. She didn't come because of her health. She's been dealing with chronic arthritis, and traveling is hard for her. She told me herself. Mom's expression faltered for just a second before she recovered. That's not what she told me, she said with a tight smile. I didn't back down. Then maybe we should call her and ask. The room went dead silent. Even Zach, who usually stayed out of our arguments, looked uncomfortable. I don't think that's necessary, Mom said quickly. No, I think it is, Melanie chimed in. I didn't wait for permission. I pulled up my messages with Aunt Karen and showed them to Melanie and a few others at the table. Sure enough, Karen had mentioned her arthritis in a text just a few days earlier, apologizing for missing the dinner and explaining how much she wished she could be there. Melanie looked up at Mom, her expression icy. Why would you lie about that? She asked. Mom sputtered, clearly caught off guard. I must have misunderstood, she said, her tone defensive. Karen can be so hard to read sometimes, but the damage was done. That one moment of exposure created a ripple effect. For years, Mom had controlled the narrative in our family, twisting events to make herself look like the victim and me the villain. But now, cracks were starting to show, and people were beginning to question her version of events. After dinner, Melanie pulled me aside. I always thought there was something off about the way your mom talks about you, she said. But this was straight up manipulative. I felt a lump in my throat. For so long, I'd thought no one saw through Mom's lies. To have someone finally validate my experience was overwhelming. Over the next few weeks, I started to notice subtle shifts in the family dynamics. Cousins who used to side with Mom began reaching out to me, asking about my perspective on things. Even my Aunt Susan, who'd always been one of Mom's biggest supporters, admitted that she'd started to see a pattern. "I don't know why I didn't notice it sooner," she said during one of our phone calls. "She's always been so dramatic. But I guess I just assumed she was telling the truth." As more relatives came forward with their own stories of Mom's manipulations, a clearer picture began to emerge. It wasn't just me she'd lied about. Over the years, she'd sown discord between nearly everyone in the family, twisting words and creating conflicts that didn't exist. One of the most shocking revelations came from my cousin Jessica. She told me about a time when Mom had convinced her that I'd said something cruel about her behind her back. "She told me you called me a spoiled brat," Jessica said. "I was so hurt, but now I'm realizing she probably made it up." "She did," I confirmed. "I never said that." Jessica apologized, and for the first time in years, we had a real conversation, one not clouded by Mom's manipulations. The more I learned, the more I realized how deeply entrenched Mom's behavior was. She didn't just want control. She wanted total dominance, and she was willing to destroy relationships to get it. But now, for the first time, I wasn't alone. The turning point came at another family gathering, this time at Melanie's house. Aunt Karen was feeling well enough to attend, and when I saw her, I hugged her tightly. "I'm so sorry for everything Mom said about us," I told her. She smiled sadly. "I've known your mom a long time, Lisa. I don't believe half the things she says anymore." That night, as we sat around the table, Melanie brought up the elephant in the room. "I think we need to talk about Amanda," she said bluntly. There were a few nervous glances, but no one disagreed. Over the next hour, we aired out years of grievances, connecting the dots and piecing together the full extent of Mom's manipulations. By the end of the night, there was a sense of solidarity I hadn't felt in years. For so long, Mom had isolated me, making me feel like I was the problem. But now, I could see the truth. Hey Reddit. If you followed my previous posts, you know my relationship with my mom, Amanda, is like something out of a soap opera, only worse because it's real. Recently, I uncovered something that made all her past manipulations seem trivial by comparison. It all started when my dad, Mark, asked for help sorting through some old paperwork. He's 62 now and recently retired. Despite everything with Mom, Dad's always been somewhat of a neutral party in the family. He's quiet, keeps to himself, and avoids conflict like the plague. But over the years, that passivity has allowed Mom to dominate every aspect of our lives. Dad had been cleaning out the garage when he stumbled across a dusty box of financial documents. "Lisa," he said, holding the box out to me, "I could really use a hand going through this stuff. I want to make sure we're squared away with everything." I agreed, thinking it would be a boring afternoon of sorting receipts and tax forms. Little did I know, that box held the key to unraveling one of Mom's biggest lies. We started going through the papers at the dining room table. There were old utility bills, mortgage statements, and random scraps of paper with barely legible notes. As I sifted through the chaos, a thick manila folder caught my eye. "What's this?" I asked, pulling it out. Dad squinted at it. "Oh, that's the education fund," he said casually. I froze. The education fund. Growing up, Mom had always talked about this mysterious fund she'd set up for Zach's schooling. It was one of her favorite weapons to wield against me. "Your brother deserves every penny," she'd say. "He's going to make something of himself, unlike you." But Zach never went to college. He dropped out of community college after one semester, claiming it wasn't for him. I'd always wondered what happened to that money, but I'd never dared to ask. I opened the folder and started flipping through the documents. At first, everything looked legitimate, bank statements showing regular contributions to the fund, a copy of the original account agreement, and even a spreadsheet Mom had meticulously maintained. But then I noticed something odd. The withdrawals. The account had been drained almost completely over the course of 5 years, starting when Zach turned 18. The amounts were staggering, $10,000 here, $15,000 there. By the time Zach dropped out of school, there was barely anything left. "Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "did you know about this?" He looked confused. "About what?" "These withdrawals," I said, pointing to the statements. "It looks like the money was taken out long before Zach even started school." Dad leaned over to look, his brow furrowing. "That doesn't make any sense. Your mom told me it was all for Zach's tuition and books." My heart started pounding as I kept flipping through the papers. Mixed in with the bank statements were receipts, lots of them, but they weren't for tuition or books. There were receipts for expensive resort vacations, luxury handbags, designer clothing, and even a down payment on a new car. Are you kidding me? I muttered, my hands trembling. Dad's face went pale as he looked over the receipts. This can't be right, he said. She told me she was using the money for Zach. She lied, I said bluntly. She used it for herself. The more we dug, the worse it got. There were hotel invoices for week-long stays at five-star resorts in places like Hawaii and the Caribbean. There were credit card statements showing purchases from high-end stores I couldn't even pronounce. And then there was the kicker, a $35,000 payment for a luxury SUV. That's Mom's car, I said, staring at the receipt. Dad slumped back in his chair, looking shell-shocked. I had no idea, he said softly. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me. For years, Mom had guilted me about Zach's education, making it seem like he was the golden child who deserved everything, while I was just an afterthought. And all the while, she'd been blowing that money on herself. I decided then and there that I wasn't going to let this slide. The next day, I called my cousin Melanie. If you've read my earlier posts, you'll remember she's one of the few people in the family who's always had my back. You're not going to believe this, I told her, walking her through everything Dad and I had found. Melanie was furious. We need to confront her, she said. I'm not sure how to do that without her spinning it, I admitted. She's so good at twisting the truth. Then we'll bring the receipts, literally, Melanie said. A few days later, we gathered a small group of family members, Melanie, Aunt Susan, my cousin Jessica, and even Dad. I wanted witnesses, people who could back me up when Mom inevitably tried to gaslight me. We confronted her in the living room. Mom was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, when we walked in. What's this about? She asked, looking annoyed. I didn't waste any time. We found the education fund records, I said, holding up the folder. Mom's face went blank for a split second before she recovered. And, she said, feigning nonchalance. And it's clear you used that money for yourself, I said, my voice trembling with anger. Her eyes narrowed. That money was for the family, she said defensively. I used it for things we all benefited from, like your car. Melanie shot back. And the vacation Zach and Lisa weren't even invited to? Mom's face turned red. How dare you accuse me of stealing? I was the one who set up that fund. I was the one who made the sacrifices to save that money. Sacrifices? I snapped. You've been lying to us for years, and now you're caught. Stop pretending you did this for anyone but yourself. The room erupted into chaos. Mom started shouting about how ungrateful we all were, while Melanie and Jessica fired back with questions she couldn't answer. But the most shocking moment came when Dad finally spoke up. Amanda, he said quietly, his voice shaking, I trusted you. I believed you when you said that money was for Zach's education. How could you do this? Mom turned to him, her face crumbling. Mark, you don't understand. No, he interrupted. I think I understand perfectly. You lied to me. To all of us. For the first time, Mom didn't have a response. She just sat there, staring at the floor, while the rest of us watched in stunned silence. That night, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and oddly enough, relief. For so long, Mom had controlled the narrative, making me feel like I was the problem. But now, her lies were finally unraveling, and people were starting to see her for who she really was. Hey Reddit, if you've been following my posts, you know my life has been one long, twisted saga of family drama. Recently, things came to a head in the most explosive way imaginable. After uncovering my mom Amanda's financial lies, I decided it was time to confront her, publicly and with the full support of my family. Organizing the meeting wasn't easy. My family is notoriously chaotic, and getting everyone in the same room without Amanda catching on felt like planning a covert mission. I reached out to my cousin Melanie first. She's sharp, organized, and, most importantly, hates manipulation just as much as I do. She agreed to help me coordinate everything. Together, we called a few key family members, including Aunt Karen, Aunt Susan, my dad, and even Zach. To my surprise, Zach agreed to come. He'd been quiet ever since the financial revelations came to light, and I wasn't sure where he stood. But when I explained what I'd found and how much Amanda had lied, he seemed genuinely shocked. If what you're saying is true, we need to get to the bottom of it, he said. We decided to hold the meeting at Melanie's house. It was neutral territory, far enough from Amanda's usual stomping grounds that she wouldn't feel like she had home court advantage. I spent the days leading up to it meticulously organizing the evidence. I had bank statements, credit card receipts, and even photos of her luxury purchases, all neatly labeled and ready to present. The night of the meeting, I was a nervous wreck. Part of me worried that Amanda would find a way to talk her way out of it, as she always did. But I knew I had to try. When everyone arrived, the tension was palpable. Aunt Karen was sitting on the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Zach stood by the window, avoiding eye contact. Dad looked tired, like the weight of everything we'd uncovered was crushing him. Melanie, ever the host, poured coffee for everyone and tried to keep the mood light. Finally, Amanda arrived. She walked in with her usual air of self-importance, greeting everyone like nothing was wrong. But the moment she saw me with the folder of evidence, her smile faltered. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice tight. I didn't waste any time. "We need to talk," I said, setting the folder on the coffee table. Amanda sat down, her expression guarded. "Talk about what?" I opened the folder and pulled out the first set of documents, the bank statements from the education fund. "This," I said, sliding them toward her. She barely glanced at them. "What am I looking at?" "These are the records from Zach's education fund," I said. "The one you drained to pay for vacations, designer clothes, and your car." Amanda's face turned red. "That's ridiculous," she said. "I used that money for Zach's education, just like I said I would." "Really?" I said, pulling out the receipts. "Because these say otherwise." I started laying out the evidence piece by piece. The $10,000 withdrawal that coincided with her trip to Hawaii. The $35,000 payment for her luxury SUV. The countless charges from high-end stores. The room was dead silent as I spoke. Amanda's usual bravado was starting to crack. She kept opening her mouth to respond but seemed to think better of it each time. Finally, she snapped. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "You've always been out to get me, Lisa. You probably made all this up just to make me look bad." I stared at her, stunned. "You think I fabricated all this?" I said. "Mom, these are official bank statements. You think I hacked into your account and faked them?" "Yes," she said, doubling down. "You've always been jealous of me. This is just another one of your schemes." At that moment, Melanie jumped in. "Amanda, stop," she said firmly. "We've all seen the evidence. There's no way Lisa made this up. You need to own up to what you've done." Amanda turned to Melanie, her eyes blazing. "You're taking her side?" "It's not about sides," Melanie said. "It's about the truth." To my surprise, Zach spoke up next. "Mom, I don't know what to believe anymore," he said, his voice trembling. "But if Lisa went through all this trouble to put the evidence together, there has to be something to it." "You too," Amanda said, looking genuinely hurt. "Yes, me too," Zach said. "You always told me that money was for my education. If that wasn't true, I deserved to know." The room erupted into chaos. Amanda started yelling about how ungrateful we all were, accusing me of turning the family against her. Aunt Karen tried to calm her down, but it only made things worse. At one point, Amanda stormed out of the room, only to return a few minutes later, her face a mask of fury. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" she said, pointing a finger at me. "You think you can just waltz in here and tear this family apart? Well, let me tell you something, Lisa. No one will ever believe you." "I think they already do," I said quietly. She looked around the room, her eyes darting from face to face. One by one, everyone avoided her gaze. Even Dad, who had always been her most loyal supporter, refused to meet her eyes. Finally, she turned back to me. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice low and venomous. With that, she grabbed her purse and stormed out of the house. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the room. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Aunt Karen broke the silence. "Well," she said, "I think that went about as well as it could have." We all laughed nervously, the tension in the room finally starting to ease. Later that night, as I packed up the evidence, Melanie pulled me aside. "You did the right thing," she said. "She's been lying to all of us for years. It's about time someone stood up to her." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Amanda had lost the battle, but knowing her, she'd already started planning her next move. Hey Reddit, if you've been keeping up with my posts, you'll know that I've spent the last several months untangling decades of lies and manipulation from my mother, Amanda. After confronting her in front of the family with undeniable evidence of her financial misdeeds, I naively thought things might finally settle down. I was wrong. Instead of accepting the truth, Amanda doubled down in the most spectacularly destructive way possible. Not long after the family meeting, Amanda started spreading rumors about me. At first, I didn't realize what was happening. I wasn't exactly in her social circle, so I didn't hear the whispers until my cousin Melanie gave me a heads up. "You need to know what your mom's been saying about you," Melanie told me one evening over the phone. What now? I sighed. She's telling people you made everything up, Melanie said. She's calling you a liar and saying you're trying to destroy the family out of jealousy. I felt a familiar mix of anger and exhaustion wash over me. Amanda had always been good at playing the victim, but this was a new low. Whose people? I asked. Everyone, Melanie replied. Her book club, her church group, even some of our relatives. Sure enough, the fallout wasn't limited to her friends. Over the next few weeks, I started getting awkward phone calls and messages from extended family members. Some were polite but clearly skeptical, asking if there was another side to the story. Others were outright accusatory, demanding to know why I was attacking my own mother. The worst call came from my Aunt Patricia, who's always been one of Amanda's closest allies. Lisa, what are you doing? She asked, her tone sharp. Your mother is devastated. She's saying you're spreading lies about her to ruin her reputation. I took a deep breath and tried to explain, calmly and rationally, what had happened. I walked her through the evidence, the bank statements, the receipts, the undeniable proof that Amanda had misappropriated tens of thousands of dollars. But Patricia wasn't having it. Even if that's true, she said, how could you air this in front of everyone? Families are supposed to stick together. Families are also supposed to be honest with each other. I shot back. The conversation ended in a tense stalemate, and I realized that Patricia, like so many others, was too entrenched in Amanda's version of reality to see the truth. But not everyone was fooled. Melanie, bless her, started countering Amanda's lies with facts. She printed copies of the evidence I'd presented at the family meeting and discreetly shared them with anyone who seemed to be on the fence. People need to know the truth, she said. If Amanda's going to spread lies, we'll fight back with facts. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. Some relatives who had initially sided with Amanda started reaching out to me, apologizing for doubting me and thanking me for exposing her lies. One of the most surprising shifts came from Zach. After the family meeting, he'd been distant, as if trying to process everything. But one evening, he called me out of the blue. I don't know how you put up with this for so long, he said, his voice heavy with regret. I feel like I've been blind to everything she's done. Hearing those words from Zach was bittersweet. For years, he'd been the golden child, basking in Amanda's favor while I was the scapegoat. But now, for the first time, he seemed to understand the depth of her manipulation. I'm sorry, he added. I should have stood up for you a long time ago. It's not your fault, I said, and I meant it. Amanda had been controlling him just as much as she'd been controlling me, albeit in a different way. While some family members rallied around me, others began setting firm boundaries with Amanda. Aunt Susan, who had always been skeptical of Amanda's drama, stopped returning her calls altogether. I'm too old for this nonsense, Susan told me when I asked about it. Life's too short to waste on toxic people. Even Aunt Karen, who'd been one of Amanda's staunchest defenders in the past, started pulling away. She lied about you, Lisa, Karen said. And if she lied about you, who's to say she hasn't lied about me or anyone else? Amanda didn't take the rejection well. She became increasingly desperate, calling relatives at all hours and showing up uninvited to their homes. When that didn't work, she turned her attention back to her social circle, trying to drum up sympathy among her friends. One afternoon, I got a call from one of Amanda's church friends, a sweet older woman named Helen. Lisa, dear, I just wanted to let you know I'm praying for you, Helen said. Thank you, Helen, I replied, confused. Your mother's been saying some awful things about you, but I told her I didn't believe a word of it, Helen continued. I know a good person when I see one. I felt a lump in my throat. For so long, Amanda had controlled the narrative, painting herself as the victim and me as the villain. But now, people were starting to see through her facade. The final straw came when Amanda tried to stage an intervention against me. She invited a group of relatives and friends to her house, claiming it was a family reconciliation meeting. But when Melanie got wind of it, she warned me not to go. She's setting you up, Melanie said. She's going to ambush you in front of everyone. Instead of attending, I sent Melanie with a folder of evidence and a letter explaining my side of the story. According to Melanie, the meeting devolved into chaos almost immediately. She started crying as soon as I handed her the folder. Melanie told me afterward. She kept saying, "This isn't fair. This isn't fair." But no one was buying it. Hey Reddit. I'm back again to share what might be the most unexpected chapter in this entire saga with my family. After all the chaos, heartbreak, and betrayal, it feels surreal to say this, but we're finally starting to rebuild. It didn't happen overnight. After the family meeting where I confronted Amanda with the evidence of her financial misdeeds, things were tense. Some relatives cut ties with her altogether, while others, like my dad and brother Zach, took a long, hard look at the damage she'd caused. My dad, Mark, had always been quiet and passive in the face of Amanda's domineering personality. For years, he let her handle their finances, trusting that she'd do what was best for the family. But after seeing the evidence of her reckless spending, he realized how much damage her actions had caused, not just to their finances, but to the family as a whole. One day, Dad called me out of the blue and asked if I could meet him for coffee. When I arrived at the cafe, he looked more serious than I'd ever seen him. "Lisa," he said, "I owe you an apology." I was stunned. My dad had never been one for emotional conversations, let alone apologies. "I should have stepped in years ago," he continued. "I let your mom take control of everything because it was easier than fighting her. But that was a mistake. I see that now." His words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I'd felt like I was fighting this battle alone, and hearing him acknowledge his part in it felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. "I'm taking back control of our finances," he said. "I've already spoken to a lawyer about separating our accounts and setting up safeguards to prevent anything like this from happening again." Dad also told me he'd found a way to recover some of the money Amanda had misappropriated. Through their lawyer, they negotiated a legal agreement that required Amanda to sell some of her luxury items, including the SUV she'd bought with Zach's education fund, and return the proceeds to the family. "It's not everything," Dad admitted, "but it's a start." The next surprise came from Zach. If you've been following my posts, you'll know that my relationship with him has always been complicated. As the golden child, he'd been shielded from much of Amanda's toxicity, and for years, he refused to see the truth about her behavior. But after the family meeting, something shifted in him. One evening, Zach showed up at my apartment unannounced. He looked nervous, like he wasn't sure if I'd slammed the door in his face. "Can we talk?" he asked. I let him in, though I wasn't sure what to expect. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, "and I need to apologize for everything." He took a deep breath before continuing. "I was blind to how Mom was treating you. I believed her lies because it was easier than questioning her, and I let her use me to hurt you. I'm so sorry, Lisa." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Hearing Zach take accountability for his actions was something I'd never imagined. "I should have stood up for you," he said, his voice cracking. "You were trying to help me, and I let her turn me against you. I see that now." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "Thank you," I said quietly. "That means more than you know." We spent hours talking that night, unraveling years of misunderstandings and hurt. Zach admitted that he'd been in denial about Amanda's behavior for most of his life. "I wanted to believe she had our best interests at heart," he said. "But now I see that she was just using me to keep you in line. She made me feel like I was special, but it was all about control." For the first time in years, I felt like I had my brother back. Over the next few weeks, Zach made a concerted effort to repair our relationship. He started calling me regularly, checking in to see how I was doing. He even joined me for therapy sessions, where we worked on rebuilding trust and understanding. One of the most powerful moments came when Zach spoke up at a family gathering. We were at Aunt Susan's house for a small get-together, and the conversation turned to Amanda. "I want to say something," Zach said, standing up. "For a long time, I didn't see what was happening in our family. I believed things that weren't true, and I hurt people because of it. But I'm done letting Mom manipulate me. Lisa, I'm sorry for everything. You didn't deserve any of it." The room fell silent. I could see the shock on everyone's faces, but I also saw something else: respect. Zach's willingness to take responsibility and speak the truth resonated with everyone in the room. In the weeks and months that followed, the family began to heal. Relatives who had once avoided me started reaching out, apologizing for believing Amanda's lies. Aunt Karen, who'd been one of Amanda's closest allies, invited me over for lunch and said, "I can't believe I let her fool me for so long. You've been through so much, Lisa, and I'm sorry for not supporting you sooner." Even Dad, who'd always been more of an observer than a participant in family drama, started making an effort to strengthen our relationship. He began calling me more often, inviting me to dinner, and even asking for my opinion on important decisions. "I want to make up for lost time," he said one evening as we sat on his back porch. "You deserved better, and I'm going to do everything I can to be a better father from now on." As for Amanda, she's still in the picture, but her influence has waned significantly. Most of the family has set clear boundaries with her, and some have cut ties completely. She still tries to stir up drama now and then, but her efforts fall flat without the support she once had.